I taught 200 high school students aged 16 to 18 to play and run Dungeons and Dragons. And this is how I did it. So I'm a high school teacher and I teach senior English, and I love teaching senior English. However, one of the things about it is my students hate reading, and writing is a fate worse than death. I do a lot of sales in my classroom, is trying to explain to them why should they care about what they're doing. At the same time, I noticed that they struggle with, when they write, how to write something from another person's point of view, which is really important when you're trying to convince someone or persuade. And so as I was thinking one day, how could I better do that? One day during the summer, it clicked. Role playing. I was super excited. I'm like, dude, I can actually teach Dungeons and Dragons in the classroom and have a reason to? This is going to be so epic. Imagine if you learned Dungeons and Dragons in your classroom. How cool would that have been? I set off at the beginning, I wanted them to have a good experience. I didn't want to ruin them for the game forever. I also knew that I was going to have a lot of naysayers. I'd have some that have never even heard Dungeons & Dragons, but also some that had thought, oh, I heard about that game. That's a bunch of nerds play that game. And some had seen it on Stranger Things and a lot of other things. And I did have some naysayers from the very beginning. Some were saying, oh, we're going to play Dungeons & Dragons. Okay. So that happened at the very beginning. So I knew I'd have to sell them on the idea of why they should care about playing Dungeons & Dragons in the classroom. Speaking of sales, if you like tips to make your game more fun at your table, whether you're Dungeons & Dragons or other TTRPGs, be sure and join the family by subscribing. So in order to sell them on the idea of Dungeons & Dragons, I had to first explain what the game was, but also show them that cool people play this game too. So I showed them the video from Dungeons & Dragons themselves of the girl explaining how to play Dungeons & Dragons. And she's pretty, so I figured that might help a little bit too. And she had a cool accent. That doesn't hurt.
Before long, your ears will be ringing with the clash of swords, and your eyebrows will be singed by explosive fireballs.
Then I showed them a video of cool people playing actors, as in Vin Diesel. A lot of them know Vin Diesel from Fast and Furious movies, so they were actually pretty surprised to see Vin Diesel playing Dungeons & Dragons. So I showed clips from that to kind of get them excited about the game and like, ooh, a Vin Diesel plays. So kind of open their minds up a little bit and be willing to try. Next, I taught them some of the fundamental things that they need to know how to play, like armor class and hit points and saving throws. Just kind of threw those in as little mini lessons every once in a while, not to wear them all out in one day of all this stuff about Dungeons and Dragons. Then I went over some pre-made characters that I knew that they'd be using. So I generated some pre-made characters and I introduced them to those characters. Each day I'd show a character or their picture and some stats on them and a little bit about their personality so they can start to kind of see that these are the different characters that they're going to play. I also did a mini lesson on what a Dungeon Master is and kind of some of the things that they do. What I did for this was I made Dungeon Master a role that they would actually play. So they had pre-made characters that they would do, and they each would take turns playing that, as well as each one would take turns being Dungeon Master. So once I was kind of satisfied that they kind of had the ins and outs of a little bit, I walked them through how to play a game, kind of showed them really quickly what that would be like, and then set them loose to kind of run their own game. And in each group, I had pre-generated characters on cardstock. I had a map. Each one had their own set of dice. They had little figures, and the Dungeon Master had an encounter that was already lined up and ready to go. I had it very, very easy to run so that they could just kind of read a little bit, do some stuff, tell people what they do. It's very, very guided so that they could kind of get through that first adventure and kind of get the feel for it. They did this 4 times, and each group was able to play a character, at least play 2 or 3 different characters, as well as each person got a chance being the Dungeon Master. I wanted everyone to have an experience of being Dungeon Master to get ready for the next step. The next step, I was really kind of worried because I figured at this point, I needed to kind of figure out who would actually want to maybe try to be a Dungeon Master, and I wasn't sure I was going to get much of a response. So for every class, I asked for volunteers from each group who would want to be or try to be a Dungeon Master. And to my surprise, I had volunteers from every group. I was really excited because I was holding my breath for that one. I was like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go because I really need a Dungeon Master from each group. And I wasn't sure that was going to happen, but it did. The next step was probably the scariest. At this point, then, all right, so I have my Dungeon Masters. And so then what do we do now? So I had them create their characters because I really wanted them to create a character that they'd really kind of care about. And that's what I really thought that role-playing might really come in, is that they'd actually have some experience, really care about that character, and really start to role-play, which is what I really need them to do. The Dungeon Masters, I gave them a plethora of some PDFs I had of some pre-made adventures. And so I said, here's some. You can either use these, which is kind of the easy mode, and I kind of showed them kind of what that looks like. Or if you want, you can try to create your own. Most of the dungeon masters by far chose a pre-made adventure. But I had a couple groups that really got into it. I mean, they made maps. The dungeon master made something completely off of his head and was all excited, was telling me about the adventure he made. And his group was really, really fired up. This one group. And another class, there was another group just like that. And they were really, really into it, even more so than the ones in the pre-made adventures. So, how did it go? Well, there was good. And there was bad. The bad part is I should have really kind of figured that some of them did not prepare. They didn't really kind of understand the idea that you kind of have to do a little homework as a dungeon master and kind of have to be prepared. Even if it's pre-made, you got to kind of read over what's going to happen, get an idea what might happen today so you're prepared to go. And that didn't happen so much. So it was very hard to get them going along in that respect and really buy into it. Now, the ones that were fired up about it and created their own, they were all excited and they were all into it. But those that had the pre-made, it was really not so much into it. So that was really clunky and really hard to get going. The worst problem was when Dungeon Master was absent. So if it was one class and one dungeon master is absent, and I would just jump in and just kind of continue on from where they're at, and it went all just fine. But it was kind of hard. I had to jump in, just kind of figure out where they're at and just go. But it was really bad if, oh, great, there's 2 dungeon masters out. Now what do I do? So that made it really hard. In that case, what I would do is maybe put two groups together and kind of do a one-shot kind of thing just to kind of get them doing some DMD or something for that day. Another problem is we only have 50 minutes each class. That is a big hurdle. So getting everything, get the tubs out, get your maps out, get ready to go. You really only have about a half hour to play. And so that really was put a damper on getting a rhythm of the game and all those things. So that was a big, big, big challenge. And probably the last thing that was really a big thing is their grades started to slip. And so then I was like, what if someone, I wasn't sure if the administration was definitely on board with this idea. But I also was, so I was a little worried that their grades are low. They really need to pass. We need to get some assignments turned in. And also I used kind of Dungeons and Dragons as an incentive. Once you get these grades up, we can finally play. And so that became a bit of an issue going along. The good, though, was big. I got to see those people who are marginalized really shine. Those quiet kids, the ones that are just a little bit different, we all know how that is. They really got to shine. They felt comfortable opening up. They really got into their character. They were more vocal than they would often be because it was safe. I've noticed in working with people who say have on the autism spectrum, they feel safe in role playing, and so they just really come out of their shell, and it's really cool to see. So I was really, really happy with that. The other thing that was really cool was to see the naysayers come over to my side. Give you an example. One of my most vocal people from the beginning was one of my football players, and we'll call him Derek. And Derek from the beginning was like, we're going to play D&D, okay. But I'm telling you, at the end, one day, he didn't come prepared, just like I was telling you some of them didn't come prepared. That guy freestyled the whole game, the whole period. Like he was coming off of it on the top of his head what was happening. This is happening, then this happened, and then you go ahead and roll for investigation. And he was doing all those things right from the top of his head. And I was just in awe, like, whoa, okay. So that was really cool. So was it a success? All in all, I think yes. Did it accomplish the goal that I set out? I don't know. So the problem was they didn't really get so much to the part where they got into their character enough to really role play enough that I don't know that they saw things from that person's point of view as much as I'd like to. So that was a bit of an issue. And then all the things I discussed before, they were a little bit of a challenge. So the question I'm sure is on your mind is, am I going to do this again? And the answer is I plan to, but I've got to make some modifications. I've been looking into a couple things. Number one is, can I dungeon master an entire class? Is there a way to do that? And that's not looking good. I mean, I thought about pairing people up and 2 people on one character. That's still a giant group. Maybe have one whole group do one character. But again, I think it gets away from what I really want is them to play a character and role play that character. So I'm not feeling really great about that. One idea I have is maybe to go a different game, like a rules light game like Shadow Dark, where they can really jump in and start playing right away. And as a dungeon master, there's not a lot of preparation necessarily, because this is mostly a dungeon crawl, and there's not as much preparation of backstory and all that adventure kind of stuff. A lot of the adventures are very story driven, whereas a dungeon crawl might get them in there and just playing and maybe role playing a bit. If you have some ideas and have some tips that how I can maybe change things and make things a little better next year and fix those problems we talked about, put some stuff down in the comments. I'd really appreciate that. And thanks for watching.